Emily Monroe had spent her life behind towering gates and under higher expectations. Marble floors, private jets, glittering galas. They were the backdrop to her childhood, stitched together with stiff smiles and hollow congratulations. From the outside, it was but perfection was its own kind of prison. Her family's name, Monroe Financial Group, was etched into skyscrapers from Manhattan to Hong Kong, and with it came an invisible leash. Every move she made, every friend she chose, every dream she dared to whisper, all filtered through the cold lens of what's best for the family. There were no wrong answers because there were no real choices, only obligations. Music had been her only rebellion, a secret tucked between her ribs like a fragile ember. Late at night, when the mansion's cavernous halls fell silent, Emily would slip out to the abandoned greenhouse on the far end of the property. There, hidden beneath stars and broken glass, she'd coax soft songs from a battered guitar she had found at a flea market. A guitar her father would have ordered burned if he'd known. They had her life planned, an arranged marriage to a suitable heir of another financial dynasty, merging two empires into one monstrous machine. A future dressed in diamonds and designer gowns built on, she wanted none of it. So one rainy night, with the ink barely dry on her engagement contract, Emily made a different choice. She stuffed a duffel bag with cash, slipped the guitar strap over her shoulder and walked away. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just the raw, desperate hope that somewhere out there, beyond the manicured hedges and endless boardrooms, a real life was waiting. She didn't know where the road would take her. She only knew it had to be far, far away from the life she was born into, and she would never go back. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of gold and rust under a bruised evening sky. Jack Carter squinted against the glare of the sun, his battered Chevy pickup rattling along the cracked highway like an old song played one too many times. He had just enough gas to reach Las Vegas, just enough hope to believe the next repair job might actually pay what it promised. Just enough faith left in the world to think maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The radio sputtered static as he twisted the knob, more out of habit than expectation. The heat clawed at him, dragging sweat from his skin, thick and sour. His stomach grumbled, but the last few bucks in his wallet were spoken for. A bottle of pain meds for his mother's aching joints waiting back home. He was down to fumes in more ways than one. That's when he saw her. At first, she was just a smudge on the horizon, a ghost shimmering in the desert haze. But as he drew closer, Jack made out the shape of a girl. No, a woman, stumbling along the shoulder of the road. Her jeans were ripped, sneakers caked with dust, a thin army green jacket whipped tight around her as the wind kicked up. She carried nothing but a battered guitar case slung over one shoulder. Jack eased his foot off the gas, slowing. His gut twisted. Helping strangers out here could mean trouble. Then again, so could living with yourself after passing by someone who needed saving. He pulled over about 50 feet ahead of her, letting the engine grumble while he debated whether this was smart or suicidal. Before he could decide, the girl broke into a run, crossing the few yards between them with a desperation that punched through even the roaring desert wind. "Please," she gasped as she reached his truck, her voice raw. "Anywhere but here, please." Jack studied her, one hand hovering near the gear shift. She looked barely 20, though her eyes told a harder story, wide, weary, and exhausted to the bone. "You in some kind of trouble?" he asked, his voice rough from hours of silence. She hesitated just long enough to make the air between them feel heavier. "No," she said too quickly. Then softer, almost a confession. "Maybe." Jack glanced down the road behind her. Empty, endless, stretching back toward nothing but sand and forgotten promises. No cars, no dust trails, no immediate threat he could see. He exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the cracked leather. Steering wheel. He didn't need this. He needed gas, a meal, a break. Not someone else's nightmare. But there was something about her, something raw and stubborn like a half-broken wild thing, that tugged at him. "You got a name?" asked, cutting through the tension. "Emily," she said, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to keep from flying apart. "Emily what?" Another hesitation, a flicker of something she tried to hide. "Monroe," she muttered. Jack didn't press. Hell, he had plenty of things he didn't want to explain either. He jerked his thumb toward the passenger door. "Get in." I didn't wait for a second invitation. Emily yanked the door open, tossed her guitar case in, and climbed up into the cab. Jack watched her for a beat longer, then threw the truck into gear and pulled back onto the highway. The city shimmered in the distance, a mirage of neon and noise. Behind them, the desert swallowed their tracks without a sound. For a long stretch, neither spoke. Only the crackle of the radio and the low rumble of tires against asphalt filled the space between them. Jack stole a glance at her. Emily sat rigid in the seat, knuckles white where she clutched the fraying strap of her guitar case. Her face was pale beneath the grime, mouth set in a stubborn line, but it was her eyes that held him. A strange mix of fear and something fiercer. Hope, maybe. "You planning on telling me why you're out here alone?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Emily stared out the window as if the horizon might offer an answer. "Just needed to leave," she said finally. "Didn't much care where I was going." Jack gave a soft grunt. He understood that kind of leaving, the kind that wasn't about running from something, but running toward anything else. "Vegas isn't much of a fresh start," he said. "Maybe not," Emily murmured. "But it's better than staying trapped." Jack didn't know what she meant exactly, but he didn't ask. Some things didn't need spelling out. Some cages had gold bars, and they were the hardest to break free from. The road unwound before them, a thin thread leading into the unknown. Somewhere ahead, promises and dangers waited in equal measure, and somewhere behind, Jack figured, was a world Emily Monroe had no intention of returning to. He pressed a little harder on the gas, feeling the weight of choices neither of them could take back now. Whatever road they were on it together. The miles melted away under the truck's worn tires, the desert slowly giving way to rocky hills and jagged canyons. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange and violet across the vast sky. Jack kept his eyes on the road, but every so often he'd flick a glance sideways at Emily. She hadn't let go of that old guitar case once. Her fingers fidgeted restlessly on the strap as if holding onto it kept her anchored somehow. The silence between them stretched long and taut, filled with the unspoken. "You running from someone or something?" Jack asked finally, keeping his tone casual, almost lazy. Emily didn't answer right away. She traced a scratch on the window with her fingertip, a nervous, mindless motion. "Both," she said at last. "So," quietly, he almost missed it. Jack nodded once, a gesture more to himself than to her. He knew that feeling too well. "You do realize," he said after a moment, "that picking up hitchhikers is how half the horror stories start?" At that, Emily smiled. Small, real, and fleeting. "Maybe I'm the one who should be worried," she said, her voice threaded with tired humor. Jack chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, maybe you should." They lapsed back into silence, but it wasn't as stiff as before, like two travelers sharing the same battered map, knowing the journey was rough, but figuring at least they weren't facing it alone. About an hour out from the city, Jack pulled into a grimy gas station, the kind where even the buzz of the fluorescent lights sounded suspicious. He killed the engine, stretching his arms over his head with a groan. "You hungry?" he asked, jerking a thumb toward the dusty convenience store. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I could eat." Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and cheap cleaner. Jack grabbed a couple of microwave burritos and a bottle of water, tossing them onto the counter. Emily lingered by the front, glancing nervously out the window, clutching her guitar case close. "Relax," Jack said quietly when he joined her. "No one's chasing you here." Emily flinched slightly but managed a nod. They ate in the truck, the burritos lukewarm and rubbery, but good enough when you hadn't eaten in who knows how long. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and leaned back against the cracked seat. "So," he said, tossing the empty wrapper onto the dashboard, "you got family somewhere?" Emily stared at the horizon. "Depends what you mean by family." Jack gave her a sidelong look. "The kind that had come looking for you," he said. "Or the kind you're trying to disappear from." Emily hugged her knees up against her chest. For a long moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "Some people are born into cages, Jack. All pretty on the outside, polished and gold. But it's still a cage." Jack felt those words hit somewhere deep. He didn't press. He didn't need the details to recognize the truth behind them. The sun finally dipped below the mountains, leaving the world drenched in purple twilight. The first stars blinked into existence overhead, silent witnesses to the secrets neither of them were quite ready to share. Jack turned the key, the engine rumbling back to life. As they pulled onto the highway again, Emily shifted slightly, reaching down to adjust her battered guitar case. The movement caused the case's flap to fall open for a split second. Just enough for Jack to catch a glimpse inside. Not a guitar. Bundles of cash, thick stacks of it. Jack's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, pretending not to notice. Emily hastily snapped the flap shut, her face turned away toward the window. They drove on, the only sounds the steady hum of tires and the whisper of secrets swirling in the darkness around them. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Whatever he had gotten himself into, it was deeper than he'd ever bargained for. But it was too late to turn back now. The first crack of thunder rolled across the open sky as they crossed into Arizona. Jack squinted through the windshield at the gathering clouds, thick and bruised, piling up along the horizon like an army ready to march. The desert heat broke under the weight of the coming storm, the air turning sharp and metallic. "Looks like we're about to get wet," Jack muttered, flicking on the wipers even though the first drops hadn't yet fallen. Beside him, Emily shrank deeper into her seat, as if trying to make herself invisible. Her battered jacket did little to hide the tension in her shoulders. They pushed forward another 20 miles, the rain beginning as a mist and then thickening into sheets that blurred the world into grey smudges. Visibility dropped to a few yards. Jack cursed under his breath, the truck's old tires slipping on the slick road. "We need to find shelter," he said. Just ahead, flickering neon cut through the storm, a bent half-broken sign reading Saguaro Lodge, swinging wildly in the wind. The lodge itself was a squat, crumbling building squatting at the base of the hills, its stucco peeling and its windows dark. But it was shelter. Jack pulled into the flooded parking lot and cut the engine. The rain battered the roof with a steady roar. "Come on," he said, jerking his chin toward the lodge. "Better than drowning out here." Inside, the air was stale with mildew and regret. A tired-looking man behind a cracked counter slid a key across without so much as a second glance at Jack or Emily. Room 7, at the far end of a dim hallway that smelled of damp carpet and broken dreams. Jack pushed open the door, letting Emily slip inside first. The room was small. One sagging bed, a dresser missing half its drawers, a window that rattled with every gust of wind. Emily dropped her guitar case at the foot of the bed and stood there, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked so small, so lost. "You'll be safe here for a while," Jack said, locking the door behind them. Emily sank onto the bed, staring at the frayed carpet. "Safe," she echoed, voice hollow. Jack turned away to give her some space, moving to the window and peering through the rain. No sign of anyone following. Not yet. But the feeling gnawed at him, a prickling at the back of his neck that had saved his life more than once. They weren't out of danger. They were just catching their breath. Behind him, soft notes filled the room. He turned to see Emily cradling the guitar, the real one, strumming quietly, almost absent-mindedly. The song was old and sorrowful, a lullaby for broken things. Jack leaned against the wall and listened, the music threading between them like a fragile bridge. "You're good," he said when she finished, the words gruff but honest. Emily smiled, a small real thing that barely touched her eyes. "It's the only thing I ever chose for myself," she said. Jack's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Emily set the guitar aside, tracing a finger along the worn fretboard. "I was born into a life," she said slowly. "One mapped out before I took my first breath. Schools, friends, clothes, future, even who I was supposed to love. All decided." She gave a humorless laugh. "My name may as well have been Asset instead of Emily." Jack didn't interrupt. He knew the importance of letting someone talk when the words finally broke free. "My family. They're not the kind of people who take no for an answer," she continued. "They don't lose. They don't forgive." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze with a fierce defiance. "And they definitely don't let their daughter walk away with their secrets." Jack's jaw tightened. He thought of the bundles of cash hidden. In her guitar case, the glimpse of crisp paper stamped with official seals. Not just money. Evidence. Power. "You're carrying something more than just a few bucks, aren't you?" he said quietly. Emily didn't answer, but she didn't have to. A loud crack outside made them both jump. Not thunder, the slamming of a car door. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides, peeling back the edge of the curtain. Through the blurred glass, headlights sliced through the rain. 2 black SUVs. No plates. "They found you," he said grimly. Emily's face went pale. She grabbed her case, her hands shaking. Jack thought fast. "Bathroom window. It's small, but it'll work." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll buy you time," he said without hesitation. "Go." Emily clambered onto the narrow windowsill, disappearing into the storm. Jack stayed behind, just long enough to kick the dresser over in front of the door. Then he grabbed his jacket and bolted after her, disappearing into the howling night. The rain hammered them, blinding and deafening. Jack could barely make out Emily's small figure stumbling toward the back lot, clutching the guitar case like a lifeline. Shouts rang out, heavy boots splashing through puddles. "Emily!" a voice roared, deep, commanding, cruel. Jack's blood ran cold. They were closer than he thought. He caught up to her at the fence line, boosted her over with a grunt, then vaulted after her. A shot rang out, splintering wood inches from his hand. "Move!" he barked, grabbing her wrist and dragging her into the darkness. They ran blindly, the storm swallowing them whole. Their pursuers' shouts faded into the distance, drowned by the roar of the rain and the racing of their hearts. Jack didn't stop until they reached a drainage tunnel beneath the road, hidden by thick brush. He shoved Emily inside first, then crawled in after her. Breathing hard, soaked to the bone, they sat there in the pitch black. "Are you okay?" he panted. Emily nodded, pressing her forehead against her knees. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving only exhaustion. The road ahead was dark and dangerous. He knew that now. But as he listened to Emily's ragged breathing beside him, he also knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. The rain softened to a drizzle as Jack and Emily huddled in the cramped drainage tunnel, hearts pounding in the dark. Outside, the desert night had grown cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Jack wiped rainwater from his eyes and listened. No more shouts, no more gunshots. Only the steady drip of water from the tunnel's ceiling and the distant rumble of thunder moving farther away. He turned to Emily, who was curled against the concrete wall, still clutching the guitar case like it might save her. "We can't stay here," he said, voice low. "They'll circle back. They'll keep hunting." Emily lifted her head, her face pale in the faint light. "Where do we go?" Jack thought fast. The truck was too far, even if it hadn't already been compromised. They needed a ride, needed distance. He remembered passing a maintenance yard about a mile back. Service trucks, old and half forgotten. If luck hadn't abandoned them completely, maybe one of those trucks would still have keys tucked behind the sun visor, the way lazy workers sometimes did. "Come on," he said, reaching out a hand. Emily took it without hesitation, her fingers cold but steady in his. They slipped through the wet grass, moving low, keeping to the shadows. Jack led them along the fence line, through a scraggly patch of mesquite trees, until they reached the yard. Rows of service vehicles sat behind a sagging chain-link fence. No guards, no cameras. Probably no functioning security system either. Jack found a gap in the fence where the metal had rusted away and boosted Emily through first. He followed, careful not to snag his jacket on the twisted wire. Inside the yard, they moved from truck to truck, checking doors. Locked, locked, open. Jack climbed into an old white Ford with a logo for Arizona Power and Water faded on the side. He flipped down the sun visor. A set of grimy keys fell into his lap. He allowed himself the smallest, briefest smile. "Get in," he told Emily, who scrambled into the passenger seat. The engine sputtered on the first turn, coughed on the second, then roared to life on the third. Jack threw it into reverse, backed carefully out of the rows of abandoned trucks, and pointed them toward the service road beyond the fence. They peeled away into the night, leaving the Saguaro Lodge and its broken promises behind. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the slap of wet tires on asphalt. Emily slumped against the door, shivering. Jack cranked up the heater until the vents spat out lukewarm air. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded but didn't speak. After a long moment, Jack reached under his seat, found a ragged old blanket he kept for emergencies, and tossed it across her lap. "Thanks," she whispered, pulling it tightly around her shoulders. They drove in silence, heading nowhere in particular, only away. Away from the men in black SUVs, away from the life Emily was running from, away from the storm still brewing on the horizon. As the miles slipped by, Emily finally broke the silence. "Back there," she said, her voice hoarse. "You could have left me. You could have walked away." Jack kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah, well, not really my style." She gave a hollow laugh. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," Jack said. "But I know what it's like to need someone. And I know what it feels like when nobody shows up." Emily looked at him for a long time, something fragile and unsure flickering in her eyes. Then she looked away again, blinking. Fast, a battered green road sign loomed ahead. Flagstaff 22 miles. Jack made a decision. He veered onto an old mountain pass that wound through the hills, a road less traveled, harder to follow. "You think they'll keep chasing me?" Emily asked quietly. Jack tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. "Depends on what you're carrying," he said carefully. Emily hesitated, then unzipped a hidden pocket in her guitar case. From inside she pulled out a thick envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. "You said it wasn't just about running from an arranged marriage," Jack said. Emily nodded slowly. "There's proof in here," she said, voice barely a whisper, "of what my family's really done. Money moved through fake charities, bribes, blackmail, things that could burn them down if they ever saw daylight." Jack whistled low under his breath. "And you're carrying it around like a live grenade." "Yeah," Emily said with a bitter smile. "Pretty much." The truck bumped along the uneven road. Ahead, the hills thickened into real mountains, dark silhouettes against the starlit sky. Jack slowed the truck, pulling onto a narrow overlook. From here, they could see the city lights of Flagstaff glowing faintly in the distance. He turned off the engine but left the heater running. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside was silent, vast, and full of possibilities, some good, some deadly. "You know," Jack said finally, "you could still ditch me. Take this truck, find a bus, disappear." Emily shook her head fiercely. "No," she said. "If I'm going down, I'm not doing it alone, not anymore." Jack looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just a runaway. She wasn't just a scared kid. She was steel wrapped in bruises, grit wearing a battered jacket. He nodded once, solemn and sure. "Then we do this together," he said. "No matter what's coming." Emily's lip trembled, but she smiled, a real unguarded smile that lit up her entire face. "Together," she echoed. Above them, a shooting star slashed across the sky, burning a brilliant line through the dark, and somewhere far behind them, the hunters regrouped. But, for now, for this moment, they had each other, and they had hope. Jack started the engine again, steering them off the overlook and back onto the winding road. The night swallowed them whole. Two fugitives, two warriors, two broken souls daring to outrun the past. Together, the narrow mountain road twisted higher into the Rockies, wrapping the truck in thick stands of pine and shadow. Dawn was still hours away, but the horizon had begun to lighten with a faint promise of morning. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel, though his mind raced. Emily sat quietly beside him, her head tilted against the window, the envelope of damning, documents resting between them like a sleeping viper. Jack knew they couldn't keep running forever. They needed cover. They needed time to think. At the next fork in the road, he veered onto a rugged dirt path leading deeper into the wilderness. A few miles in, they stumbled upon a tiny cabin, abandoned, sagging, almost lost to the forest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jack killed the engine and stepped into the cold dawn air, scanning the surroundings with a mechanic's instinct and a fighter's caution. No fresh tracks, no smoke from other chimneys, no signs of life but the rustle of trees in the wind. "Come on," he said to Emily, grabbing the essentials from the truck. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and old ashes. Dust floated like mist in the weak light filtering through cracked windows. A battered wood stove crouched in one corner, half a cord of firewood stacked nearby. Jack set to work immediately, coaxing a small fire into life while Emily curled up. On the floor, the blanket around her shoulders. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire cracked and hissed, casting shifting shadows across the splintered floorboards. Finally, Jack sat down opposite her, elbows resting on his knees. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. Emily hugged the blanket tighter, as if bracing herself for a blow. Jack nodded toward the envelope. "You said it's evidence. Bribes, laundering, blackmail. Enough to take down Monroe Financial and anyone tied to it." She nodded slowly, eyes locked on the flames. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Why trust me with it?" Emily's voice was a whisper when she answered. "Because you stayed." Jack blinked, caught off guard by the simple honesty of it. "I didn't trust anyone when I left," she continued. "Not even myself. But you could have walked away a dozen times by now. And you didn't." She met his gaze then, and Jack saw the depth of it, the fear, the hope, the stubborn will to survive. "You stayed," she said again. "And that means more than anything." Jack exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. He thought of the life he'd left behind, the debts, the broken promises, the years of thinking nobody needed him. And now, Here he was, the last line of defense for a girl who had never been allowed to live her own life. "It's not just about survival. Anymore, is it?" he said softly. Emily shook her head. "It's about choosing the life I want," she said. "Even if it's messy, even if it's hard, I can't go back to being a pawn." Jack leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. "You're right," he said, after a moment. "And if you want out, if you want to blow this whole thing wide open, you're gonna need help." Emily blinked. "What kind of help?" Jack's mouth twisted into a grim smile. "The kind that knows a thing or two about fighting dirty." He dug into the backpack he had grabbed from the truck and pulled out an old flip phone, one he hadn't touched in years. Emily watched him, confused. "I wasn't always a mechanic," Jack said, punching a number into the phone. "Used to know people who dealt in things a lot more complicated than carburetors and oil changes." The line rang once, twice, then clicked. A gruff voice answered on the other end. "Who the hell is this?" Jack grinned. "It's Jack, and I've got a favor to call in." Emily stared at him, wide-eyed. For the first time in days, a glimmer of real hope flickered across her face. "Who did you just call?" she asked. "An old friend," Jack said. "Someone who owes me. Someone who knows how to make noise when it matters." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. Inside, the fire burned stronger, throwing back the dark. Jack reached across the space between them, offering his hand. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said. Emily stared at him for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. Together they made a choice, not just to run, not just to survive, but to fight back. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Carter felt something stirring inside him that he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose. They would not go quietly. They would not be erased, and no matter how powerful the forces against them were, Jack and Emily would stand their ground, because some truths were worth fighting for, because some lives were worth reclaiming, and because together they had already proven one thing. They were stronger than the storm. The sun crested the mountain ridge, spilling gold and fire across the pine trees, washing the battered cabin in a new light. Jack Carter stood at the threshold, the cold morning air swirling around him. In his hand he held the future, or at least the match that would light it. The plan had come together faster than either of them expected. Thanks to Jack's old contact, a grizzled investigative journalist named Marcus Tate, they had a way to leak everything. The documents, the evidence of money laundering, the fake charities, the blackmail schemes. Marcus wasn't just hungry for a story. He was the kind of man who still believed journalism could save lives. Jack didn't know if it would be enough to topple an empire like Monroe Financial, but he knew it would burn loud enough, bright enough, that no one could ignore it anymore. And it would give Emily a fighting chance at a real life. Inside the cabin, Emily tightened the last strap on the worn duffel bag that now carried only the essentials: cash for the road, a battered guitar, a copy of the damning USB drive Marcus would use to expose the truth. She glanced around the cabin, their temporary fortress, with a bittersweet smile. "This place saved us," she said softly. Jack chuckled. "More like slowed down the wolves long enough for us to get a head start." Emily smiled wider, the first real unburdened smile he had seen from her. They didn't waste time. Jack had hotwired a junked jeep they found half buried under a tarp behind the maintenance yard the night before. It coughed and growled like an old dog, but it ran. By midday, they were back on the road, pushing west toward California, toward freedom. The days blurred into one another. Long stretches of empty highway, roadside diners with bad coffee and better pie, anonymous motels where they paid cash and slept lightly. Emily started to hum again in the truck, sometimes singing quietly under her breath, the guitar balanced across her knees. The music wasn't sad anymore. It was soft, resilient, the sound of a soul stitching itself back together. Jack let her be, let her heal the way she needed to. He was healing too, though he didn't say it out loud. The man who had once believed second chances were a luxury he couldn't afford was starting to realize some chances were worth fighting for, even if they terrified you. Especially if they terrified you. They finally reached the California coast as the sun was falling into the Pacific. The ocean stretched out endless and silver, and Jack pulled the jeep over at a bluff near Carmel by the sea. They sat on the hood, watching the sky burn itself down into twilight. "This is it, isn't it?" Emily said quietly. Jack nodded. "The end of the old road, and the start of the new one," she said. They stayed there a long while, letting the wind tug at their hair, letting the salt air fill their lungs. Eventually, they found a small rental, a weather-beaten cabin tucked between a grove of twisted cypress trees and the endless blue of the ocean. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Jack found work at a local garage, the kind of place that specialized in restoring old Mustangs and '67 Camaros for tourists with deep pockets. Emily, for the first time in her life, didn't have to hide. She played her guitar at small open mic nights along the coast, singing songs about broken roads, brave hearts, and the price of freedom. The town welcomed them without question, the way some places just seem to know when two people have earned their peace. They didn't talk about the past much, but it hung between them, not as a chain, but as a thread, a reminder of what they had survived, of what they had chosen. One crisp evening, under a sky strewn with stars, Jack led Emily down the beach. The sand was cold beneath their bare feet, the tide humming a quiet lullaby. Without a word, Jack dropped to one knee, pulling a small silver ring from his jacket pocket. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't expensive, but it gleamed like a promise in the starlight. "I don't have a fortune to offer you," Jack said, his voice low and sure. "No mansions, no limousines, just me, and the road ahead." Emily's breath hitched, tears glinting in her eyes. "But I swear," he continued, "wherever you want to go, whatever battles you want to fight, I'm in, all the way, no matter how hard it gets." Emily knelt in the sand with him, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, laughing through her tears. Above them, a shooting star tore across the sky, bold and bright. Maybe life didn't always go the way you planned. Maybe sometimes the road had to break you before it could lead you home. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the endless sky, Emily Monroe and Jack Carter knew they had made it, not just away from the past, not just into freedom, but into a life that was finally truly theirs. A new road, a new beginning. And this time, they weren't running anymore. They were home. Thank you for joining us on this Fortune's Wrath. If you believe, like we do, that everyone deserves a chance to start again and find their true home, do not forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here we share real and heartfelt tales that inspire, heal, and remind us all of the resilience of the human spirit. Stay with us for more stories that touch the heart and lift the soul. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.